Yeah, okay. I think we are online now, right? So welcome everyone. Welcome back to another exciting edition of the IPN series of Colloquia. And to remind you all, we are organizing these colloquia because we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of IPN this year. But now it is an enormous pleasure for me to introduce the speaker of today, which is Marietje Schaake. And Marietje is a non-resident fellow of Stanford's Cyber Policy Center and at the Institute of Human-Centered AI. She is a columnist for the Financial Times and serves on a number of non-for-profit boards, as well as on the UN's High-Level Advisory Board on AI. And between 2009 and 2019, she served as a member of the European Parliament, where she worked on trade, foreign and tech policy. And of course, she is the author of a well-known book called The Tech Coup. And in today's colloquium, she's going to talk about the tech coup, Trump, and the test for Europe. And well, I would say this is clearly an extremely timely topic because of what is happening in the world, I would say. So I'm very much looking forward to this talk. But before we start to talk, one practical announcement again. So Marietje told me that she favors a very interactive kind of session. So if you happen to have a very urgent question during her talk, I would say I think it's okay for Marietje to answer directly. So just raise your virtual hand, and you'll be given the opportunity to ask your question by your microphone. And of course, after the talk, we will allow or do a Q&A where Marietje can answer all your questions. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to our speaker, and that's Marietje. So please go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, and congratulations on the occasion of your 25th year of collaborating, working together, sharing experiences, and being an organization. As I said, I prefer interactive sessions, but especially when I am, at least according to the official office hours in the Netherlands, the last speaker between you and the weekend. So hopefully I can keep your attention a little bit by sharing some observations that I've had since publishing the Tech Coup over a year ago, talking a little bit about the book, and then bringing us back to what all of this, the latest geopolitical developments, politics in the US and in Europe means for us. And I hope this is a broadly relevant talk. I'm not an academic, and I've chosen to not give a very detailed slide-heavy presentation today, but to just share with you some observations that I have in the current moment that we live in, and hopefully then have a discussion with you so that I can also get to know you a little bit. So when I published the Tech Coup, there were quite a few people who asked, well, Ms. Schaake, you are using strong words. The word coup is a very powerful word. Are you sure that this is a notion that you can defend? Do you really think that we're dealing with an illegitimate power grab? And, you know, of course, I had thought about it. I had done my research, but I said, yes, I think the outsized power without a mandate, often without accountability of tech companies, is about power. And it is about transfer of power away from public institutions towards actors that have a profit incentive. And I think this ultimately hurts democracy. There are many incidents, some of which I'll mention today, but the sum of the parts is really what should make us worried. Now, in my book, I also dedicate quite a bit of attention to the solutions part, and that was written at a moment where I was still hoping we could count on the US government to be a part of the solution. Under President Biden, the federal government was increasingly expressing concerns about the outsized power of tech companies, the economic harms of, violations of antitrust, but also privacy issues, protection of children, lack of proper cybersecurity protections were elevating on the political agenda. And then, of course, we all know what happened about a year ago, which is that Donald Trump was elected for the second time. And we saw an acceleration towards more capture by the private sector. And so now I don't get questions anymore about whether coup is a strong word. I get questions whether a coup still is covering what's actually going on, whether we don't need stronger words at this moment in time. If we look at the unprecedented sort of synergies between private companies, many tech companies, investors, crypto entrepreneurs, and the US government, president, and state institutions. And indeed, the events in the US are dramatic and have a deep impact on the possibility to have democratically led tech and AI governance, have a deep impact on Europe because of the dramatic break of the transatlantic relation as we've known it since World War II, and of course have an impact for the companies that are benefiting from a deregulatory agenda and from room for ideas that really fall outside of the parameters of ordinary governance, such as the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, to which Elon Musk was appointed, a department that doesn't exist in the structures of the US government, an appointment that did not follow procedures of having a hearing before Congress or a distancing of the head from his many business interests. And so when we try to understand what is happening in the US from a sort of conventional political perspective, it's sometimes hard to understand. You know, why would you cut back so many key government functions? Why would you allow a private entrepreneur so close to vital, sensitive public data about citizens? But it makes a whole lot more sense if you look into the ideologies that are now more and more inspiring leaders in Silicon Valley, which are often seeking an alternative governance model, not so much democratically led, but really a sort of corporate model for society. Perceiving society as a startup with a desired CEO king at the top. If we listen to people like Curtis Jarvin and his so-called dark enlightenment, neo-reactionary ideas, and there are others that are preaching startup nations as a sort of model, we really see that the limits of what state governance and the relation to tech companies looks like is completely turned upside down, and that a lot of tech companies think that they can benefit from this opening of doing things completely differently from the way that they've been done. But for those who may think, oh, well, wasn't this a long time ago? Elon Musk is now back to leading his portfolio of companies, and we don't hear so much about the Department of Government Efficiency anymore. In fact, what we hear about it is a very brutal postmortem that it hasn't worked to reform the government. I think are missing the point that the developments that are going on are not just the ones that we see in the headlines. Excuse me, hold on. Are not just the most visible and blatant kinds of empowerments of private leaders and tech companies, but are also happening in much more subtle ways. And I want to point out a couple of ways in which tech companies are also amassing new powers. And I'll do so based on sort of 4 categories that will give you lenses through which you can look at the world if you're trying to understand, oh, well, can I discern another instance where we see tech companies taking on new authority, new agency, acquiring new insights, and how does that relate to the democratic state? And I think it's really important that you don't come away with the impression that my criticism is targeted at the tech leaders only. In the book, but also, you know, throughout my work, I'm also very critical of the abdication of responsibility by democratic and public leaders. I think the fact that they have allowed various political parties, various countries, have allowed the situation to get to the status quo of where we are is a damning situation. And we need to draw lessons and reverse course very quickly. Okay, so now to seeing ways in which a power grab by tech companies, big and small, threatens democracy in ways that are not so obvious as appointing Elon Musk to a key leadership position, or the CEOs cheering on President Trump in the front row of the inauguration, funding his new ballroom, and stuff like that. So the first way in which tech companies are incredibly powerful is when they put new products, services in the market that end up creating friction, tension, even challenging the rule of law and fundamental rights. So one aspect, and this is one I got to know quite well being a member of European Parliament between 2009 and 2019, is the example of spyware. So for those of you who are not aware, software through which devices like laptops or mobile phones can be entered, through which information can be exfiltrated, through which the device can be commandeered from the outside, have been around for, decades. Often produced by commercial companies, this kind of spyware really challenges anything from the right to privacy, but also source protection of journalists, separation of powers when it is targeted at judges or opposition leaders. And so this kind of technology, if you think about how it's being marketed, designed, and sold, is really designed to violate human rights. And it has become more and more sophisticated over time. So we now have attacks by spyware, so-called zero-click attacks, where the victim doesn't even have to make a single quote-unquote mistake, doesn't have to click an infected link, doesn't have to open a wrong attachment, doesn't have to fall for some kind of trick. No, a remote attack can be launched without needing any action, basically, from the victim. And so the fact that this kind of sophisticated spyware exists, that anyone who can afford it or wishes to get their hands on it can use it, whether it's a mob leader, whether it is a dictator and their institutions, creates a lot of tension with human rights and the rule of law. And when I was working on trying to ban the export of spyware from Europe to human rights violating countries elsewhere, the world was still, conceptualized as being divided between democracies and authoritarian regimes. We still hear this broad sketch of divisions between countries from time to time. But the fact of the matter is that spyware is also used in democracies. We've seen it in Greece, Spain, Hungary, Poland. And so we also need our own leaders in democracies to be rigid and not to fall for the idea that just because some innovation exists and it may enhance capabilities for law enforcement or what have you, it can be used, because one, the rules are not updated to meet these new technological capabilities, and two, a market is fostered that has many more harmful impacts than just the very targeted approach for which the police and justice services are hoping to use these spyware products. Spyware is one pretty obvious example. I would say facial recognition tools are another. Just because it is so widely available doesn't mean that we've solved the challenges of the right to privacy being violated, or discrimination challenges. When Black people use facial recognition systems, they often fail, and non-discrimination is another one of those core human rights, fundamental freedoms that is enshrined in our laws, but still ends up getting violated because these innovations are available and the laws have simply not, the enforcement processes have simply not come to match the innovative capabilities. So the de facto power of companies is one. The second sort of category I would like to highlight is the market power of tech companies. We hear a lot about big tech, big AI. Some call themselves startups, even though they're taking on endless investments and are valued at hundreds of billions, but they're still startups. In any case, when we try to understand how big these companies are, it's helped me to compare their market cap, so their shareholder value, to the GDP of countries. And if you do that, you see that a number of big tech companies, think about NVIDIA, think about Microsoft, are actually comparable in their market cap to the GDP of countries like Italy, the UK, France, and so on. So imagine assembling the 10 biggest tech companies. They together, because they often operate in an ecosystem, are tremendously powerful from an economic point of view vis-a-vis countries. And it shows in a number of ways. Of course, lobbying power, which is an obvious example, but also, this might be closer to home for the academics in the call, funding of academic research, of conferences, of civil society organizations, the establishment of civil society organizations, the framing of debates in the media. We've come to a point where the market power of tech companies has wide implications for companies to sustain their position of power, acquire more data, invest in the next wave of innovations, get all the compute, microchips, etc., but also influence the political debate, the public debate, in a variety of ways, not just knocking on parliamentarians' door, although I'm sure that's still happening too. So that was the second, de facto power, market power. Third is the approach that tech companies choose vis-a-vis democratic leaders, public institutions, which is often intransparent and sometimes worse than that. So when I was still a member of the European Parliament, we're talking about 2017, I was approached by someone who wanted to get in touch. This person was very, very nervous, first reached out through direct message on what was then still called Twitter, wanted to talk. And, you know, I guaranteed a number of times that I had signal, that I would not pass on the messages further until this person agreed to talk. And I was talking to a whistleblower from the company Uber. What was this whistleblower telling me? That at the time when Uber was quite controversial, discussions were happening about, you know, should the service be banned? Was it an unfair challenge to cab drivers? Was it safe? What about licenses? Could anyone just drive anyone around? Was this desirable at all? Discussions in cities like London, Amsterdam, Paris were also including considerations of banning Uber altogether. And the calculation within the company was apparently that if people who were working in oversight bodies like the data protection offices or the market regulators or maybe parliaments or maybe police offices would be informed by what Uber was if they could use the service. So, you know, the company thought, well, let's avoid that. So let's prevent parliamentarians from being able to grab an Uber because maybe they see how, you know, dirty the car is or how poorly the driver is behaving in traffic. And so this could give them a negative sense of the company. Let's not take that risk. And so the company designed, tailor-made, a separate experience by geo-fencing the areas around legislative offices, law enforcement offices, regulatory bodies, and presenting a different experience, a different app experience to people who they thought would work there. Because if you geo-fence this area, you know, for the Dutch among us, it's plein in The Hague, you know, in front of the traditional chambers of parliament, you know, the chances are that people who want to get an Uber there work there. That was the thinking. And the parallel app experience would show the cars on the little screen, as you're probably familiar with, but ultimately a car would never come. And so the people who would try to use this would get discouraged, do something else, and would not have this personal experience with Uber that might inform their professional view of the company and might inform their thoughts on banning or restricting the company. Now, this kind of brazen behavior we see more and more. We see it also when companies bid for licenses for data centers, for energy contracts, that tech companies are often hiding their true identities. So they're not saying, oh, hey, we're Microsoft, we would like to buy your wind energy, or hey, hi, we are Google, we would like to buy, we would like to get a license for a hyperscale data center. No. So very often companies choose to set up some kind of entity. In the Netherlands, there was Polder Networks that was hoping to get licenses for data center in Zeewolde. got the green light on the national level, provincial level, and ultimately the discussion sort of erupted and led to a negative vote in the local city council, town council, because it was uncovered days before the vote that this was actually Meta, and that Polder Networks was just a shield name for the company. This lack of transparency, but also the sheer power asymmetry in cases of bids for these data centers, I think are increasingly problematic for the democratic decision-making process. Because what city councillors in the town of Zeewolde conceded is that it was really hard for them to deal with the many, many thousands of pages of pitches, legal documents, consultancy reports, and so on, when they're actually only serving part-time. City councillors often meet 2 evenings after people go to their day jobs as well. And of course, this relates back to the market power element. Tech companies will shoot hail. So they will try in, 5 countries and hope that they're successful in 1 or 2, and that works for them. So they can really optimize their options by using their resources and by also failing to be transparent and open with the democratic bodies that have to decide on the green light or on a rejection. In the case of the Polder Networks / Meta request for a hyperscaler in the Netherlands, the city council voted it down. So the license was not given in the Netherlands, but 3 weeks later, Denmark gave the green light, and so Meta could develop their hyperscaler there. So besides the market power, the de facto power, and this sort of misleading, intransparent behavior that all give these tech companies power, help them to sustain their power, mislead democratic leaders and entities, we see that the role that tech companies are taking increasingly finds itself in areas that used to be the exclusive domain of states. So it's at the frontier between war and peace. It's in critical infrastructure. Think about undersea data cables, for example. Think about satellites that are used for internet connectivity or military operations. Tech companies are developing this critical infrastructure, but the rules around who should protect, who should rebuild when there's a problem, who shares information when there's an incident, are all underdeveloped. Because this is also infrastructure that spans large parts of the earth, not only between different countries, but also in the extraterritorial waters or in near Earth orbit. So these, less clearly defined territories from a sort of legal point of view. And we see that this leads to tensions when it comes to geopolitical tensions, for example, because undersea cables are increasingly a target of international operations. Satellite connectivity can be crucial, as we've seen in Ukraine, for military operations. And tech companies have a lot of power to decide, are we going to grant this connectivity or not, as Elon Musk has, put on the table. Or these undersea data cables can really become the battlegrounds for hybrid and modern day warfare. And from a sort of responsibility and accountability point of view, this all happens in a very murky, ambiguous domain from a legal point of view. So I think of tech companies as the new sovereigns, as a sort of 4th category of trying to organize our thinking about how powerful these companies are and what it means for a rules-based order for democracies and democratic leaders. So here we are after, a couple of decades of this power building up, this power manifesting itself in different ways and challenging democracy. And today we see a new urgency from our massive dependence and the tech coup that is happening because US politics has changed so dramatically. So while in Europe we use technologies from a number of countries, China, Israel, other parts of the world, our dominant dependence on US tech is so significant that I'm going to focus on that today. I don't want to dismiss the problems we face from risk of weaponization or overdependence on others, but I think The US case is specific because we've had such a strong transatlantic relation since World War II. Basically, everyone who lives in our societies today doesn't know another relation than constructive, if not challenging, but still alliance between the US and the EU for as long as they're alive. And that reality has changed over the past year. We were reminded of that this week. The plan that President Trump put on the table that really, pushed Ukraine in a corner, put a knife on their throat to sign within a certain time frame, a plan that was coordinated with the Kremlin and also sounded like talking points of the aggressor, not in line with historic views of this war of aggression by Russia. Just one example of how dramatically the transatlantic relation has changed. And this change, where we hear more and more anti-European rhetoric, also really has tech and tech policy as a key battleground, as a source of conflict, as an instrument in the conflict between the US and Europe. Excuse me, I'm a little bit under the weather. So a lot of talking is not a good idea. So I'll be quiet pretty soon. So in any case, this means that Europe needs a re-anchoring of our approach to technology. I thought this was urgent, for a long time. It's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because I think we need a much more deliberate way of using and placing technology in our democratic societies. But if it wasn't clear already, since the Trump administration, the urgency is enormous. There are economic implications of our overdependence on foreign technology, but there are also security, sovereignty, and democracy implications from our overdependence on foreign technology. And while in Europe, the name of the game has been regulation for roughly the past 5 years, everyone who wanted to hear it could go to Brussels and hear leaders talking about Europe is a super regulator. We have the Brussels effect. What we do in Europe sends ripple effects around the world, and therefore we have outsized influence. This is all our answer, a trust-based, fundamental rights protecting model of technology between a market-driven one from the US and a state-led one from China. But whoever goes to Brussels now, and maybe you've read it in the newspaper over the past weeks as well, will hear about simplification, fewer rules. Rules would be in the way of a European success, optimizing for its competitive position, and so on. This is a really new tone. At the same time, there are concerns about weakening of the enforcement of existing rules. And if you ask me, we are not talking enough about investing, using leverage of government spending towards European alternatives. So I think it's a wise decision to step away from regulation, because actually the big companies are fine, perfectly capable to navigate any kind of rules. It's important to talk about alternative approaches to strengthening Europe, but deregulation at this moment in time also sends a politically unfortunate message. While the White House, many American CEOs and politicians are pushing back against European rules, it would be unfortunate if the message seems to be, oh, well, this pressure works and we will lower our ambitions, we will lower our enforcement, and we will change our rules. And I fear that that is exactly what's happening. Meanwhile, we need regulation to have better access to capital for all those many startups and scale-ups that Europeans, of course, bring forward. We have a lot of talent, but for access to capital, they will often go to the US, which is a problem, which is a lost opportunity for Europe. We're not talking enough about how we can use spending differently, what the benefits would be of avoiding technology to be used as a tool for hegemony. The US has clear ambitions of wanting to dominate AI, have AI from the US dominate as a global standard. And so there's a real drive to bring Europeans on board of the AI platforms and create new dependencies, while I think we need fewer. And so I think, coming back to the Netherlands and wrapping this up now, opening up to questions, it's crucial that we see more politicians engaging on the choices before us, the urgency of decreasing our dependencies, strengthening European alternatives, not so much because it's some kind of economic nationalism, but because we need to lower the risk that through executive power that any president has, no matter what political party, technology gets weaponized to push Europeans to take positions that are not in their self-interest, that are not good for their democracies and not good for their citizens. So let me end there. The tech coup, unfortunately, is alive and kicking. It was, and it has developed to what it is over the past decades. But we are now seeing a critical sort of turning point in tech companies ever more powerful, the collective democracies globally ever weaker because of the US stepping away from that sort of values-driven approach to governance, stepping away from ambitions to govern tech. And so it puts a lot more urgency and pressure on Europe to do more now and to get this right. And I hope that all of you, with your various fields of tech expertise, can help inform a better political and public debate, starting with some hot questions right now. I would love to see hands.
So let me first of all thank you so much for your inspiring talk, Marietje. So hopefully everyone enjoyed it as I did. So the floor is open for any questions. So do we have questions from the audience at this moment? So please raise your hand if you have a question.
Maybe I can start.
Oh, yeah, you're sure. You
Yeah.
Go ahead, start.
Yeah. Well, of course, we're all computer science researchers. So you said, okay, you can contribute, but do you have ideas on what we could do?
Oh yes, many. So
Love to hear them.
one of the challenges that I think a lot of decision makers have, politicians, policymakers, is that they don't have good access to independent information about technology. And so around AI, I'm sure many of you have watched in horror the kinds of claims that are shared that seem unrealistic, excessive, but that they're still copied and become a sort of, mantra about what AI is and is not. Generative AI has kind of become synonymous with AI. And there are many other aspects of computer sciences, of how technology works, what you or someone else believe the trajectory of progress and capabilities looks like, that I think are super important to inform decision makers. And so, if nothing else, making available that independent information to decision makers could be incredibly valuable. So I think that's one thing that anyone can contribute to.
Any other questions from the floor? I think we have a question from Annelot.
Yeah.
So please, if you can, turn on your camera, maybe.
Hi, that's not possible, but I will ask my
That's not
question like
possible.
this.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I agree with you that we are overly reliant on outside tech software. So for our emails to our computers that we use, it's all American based, even in the computer science department. But the question I have is, how do we start to change that? Because it seems like such a big task.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. It is a big task. It is a big task, but it's also an urgent one. So what I would love to see is more guidance on, for example, public procurement. So any new purchase, what are the rooms to change contracts for tech products and services? But also, and I think this again is an area where computer scientists can be of huge help, to identify those alternatives and to help the migration and to then share what was learned in the meantime. So the issue of tech sovereignty is probably being discussed in almost every boardroom, every school leadership, I don't know, every hospital, pretty much everywhere. And yet, a lot of these organizations, first of all, lack the capabilities to be good negotiators with these tech companies, but they also lack the capabilities to critically assess what more room they might have now to make different choices. And public procurement, so spending by public institutions is one lever that will then send strong signals to the market. We see, for example, cities making different choices, like Copenhagen changing from Microsoft to Linux. And, this migration and, how much money would be needed, how did we prepare the teams, what did we learn, what was easier than we thought, what was harder than we thought, how long did it take? All these aspects, I think, could be shared in the interest of the benefit of all. And so I think we should be empowered by the fact that we've done difficult things before. We've regulated chemicals. We have many steps to regulate the use of medicine, to protect people from risk-taking by pharmaceutical companies. So let us also feel confident in the fact that we have done difficult things before and that we can do it again.
So there are also a couple of questions in the chat, but let me ask if the people are still online. So is A. Rastoki, is he or she online?
Ayushi.
Ayushi.
Ayushi. Or Richard. Yeah.
Hi.
Or,
Yeah.
Ayushi, are you online? Yes?
Yes. That
Can you
sounds
ask
like
her-
Ayushi.
Okay, can you ask your question, please?
Hi. First of all, thanks for the talk. So it's more of what we can do as academics, because every time we want to get the message along to the decision makers about the importance of software and its engineering, it seems like a hard job. And do you have any suggestions of how we can do this?
What is the-
Probably also what could be a good medium that we can
Oh,
go
right.
to.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask what makes it so hard. So a couple of things. One challenge that I see, and maybe you can help here too, as experts that do know a lot of these technical details, is that I think policymakers are shy to engage on tech topics because they worry that they don't have a computer science degree. They worry that they're going to say something stupid and that a journalist will record it and will say, oh my gosh, look at this. They don't even know what, I don't know, an API is or what an LLM is, or I don't know, things that we cannot really expect representatives to be quizzed on, but how it goes. So what I would actually think is helpful for society is to frame some of the choices before us in policy that do have to do with technology more in moral terms. So to demystify all the tech nitty-gritty behind the questions before us, because of course technical details matter. If you don't know that there are zero-click attacks through spyware, you can't really appreciate how risky a technology is. If you don't know how reliable generative AI models are, then you don't know whether they should be accepted or not. I mean, there are important parts of information that would help the public debate, but ultimately the question of how much risk are we willing to take with innovations? How much risk are we willing to take with our children? How much national security responsibility are we willing to outsource to private actors? What percentage of discrimination do we find acceptable while discrimination is forbidden? I mean, these kinds of questions are ultimately what I think are policy questions and are ultimately moral questions that have ripple effects on the technology. And so bringing those two together, I think, is usually helpful. Now, media, I know how hard it is to get an op-ed placed, for example. But maybe you can think about a public video series where things are explained in accessible ways. Maybe you can go and meet political party representatives. A lot of political parties, I don't know how international this group is, and going by the names is probably pretty international.
Very international, yes.
Yes, but most political parties in the Netherlands actually have like a digital affairs chapter. It's like a working group of people who care about that. Similarly for, you know, environmental issues or arts and culture or various topics. And so engaging with those people is probably a good bridge because they know the tech aspects or broadly have curiosity about it. And then they have a view of how to frame things in policy terms. There are a lot of civil society organizations in the Netherlands that deal with public interest tech, like the Waag Society in Amsterdam, or Civil Liberties Online, like Bits of Freedom is another organization. And for the English-speaking people, Brussels is also an important platform where lots of events happen, where you can meet policymakers. You know, if you can manage time-wise, because I know how busy everybody is, to go to Brussels for the relevant events is another way to influence the discussion.
Okay, thank you. We have Richard Bultz with a question. Are you online, Richard? If not, let me quickly move to Paul, who has a question. Oh, Richard is online. Sorry, is Richard now online now, or? And can you ask a question?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Good. Okay. Yeah, my question is actually how to move away from big tech, like Microsoft and Apple services, while we are so much depending on these services in our daily practice. Do we not have a sort of perfect locked-in example here?
Of course, you know, it's not going to be easy. I don't want to make this any prettier than I think it is. But we must also not be discouraged by frames that Europe has no choices, that this is impossible. So I think small steps of examples where it can work, also showing what it has brought, you know, maybe it's cheaper, maybe there's just more decision making power, maybe open source has benefits vis-a-vis proprietary systems, you know, these sorts of things. I mean, lock-ins also create problems. Like, it's not a problem just for the sovereignty question, but when you look at the security implications, you may have seen that the consumer rights organization went to court to challenge Microsoft to keep updating Windows 11, I think it was, because they were going to phase that out. But about 1 million users in the Netherlands, Netherlands, yes, I think Netherlands or Europe, but I think Netherlands, are still using Windows 11 on devices that are still functioning. And if you don't update them, including for security updates, then of course you create a new cybersecurity risk, etc. So again, important opportunity for computer scientists to sort of uncover this dynamic. How does this work? What is a lock-in? You know, what are the many consequences of lock-ins? I've seen the best work done in politics by tech experts informing decision makers on how the tech works in order to make better political decisions. If you look at Senator Wyden in the United States, he has an excellent tech team. The kinds of questions he can ask, the kinds of letters he can send, including about the Microsofts of this world, are really well informed and challenge the notion that we have to stick to where we are forever. I've seen people in the US calling Microsoft a national security threat, you know. So things are moving. I'm convinced that if we see this AI bubble either deflating or bursting, new openings will create to challenge the wisdom that we think is conventional now. So let us not limit our own imagination of the world that we think we need right now, that we want, and to try to take incremental steps to get there.
Right, thank you. Paul van Vulpen, please go ahead.
Super. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the presentation in general. This has been very wonderful. I had two questions. First one, now I'll only ask one. The Digital Markets Act also has a part which is interoperability enforcement, that there should be standards that we can send messages from WhatsApp to Instagram, etc., etc. The deadlines for this have already passed and it has not been implemented. Do you know what's the cause of this?
I don't know in this specific case, but I do know that there are some delays in Brussels, whether it's informed by concern of what it might mean for the transatlantic relation or otherwise. But in general, I think we need to see through the laws that have been democratically adopted with powerful enforcement, but also with enforcement innovation. Again, I see a huge role for computer scientists here, because our enforcement processes, even our legislative processes, don't always match the world that we live in. So, you know, assessing whether an antitrust violation happened by a chain of restaurants or by an algorithm is a different kind of activity. I mean, this oversight requires different skills, different mandates to probe information, and also the party at the other end of the table might vary in scale. You know, even the biggest restaurant chain is not as powerful as the biggest tech company. So also thinking about, if we want if we want antitrust enforcement, if we want non-discrimination protected, if we want data protected, what are new ways in which this could happen? Where is it at stake? What do these systems look like? And what could oversight look like? Again, I mean, I don't know the various specializations you have as computer scientists, but I see huge opportunities for your expertise to be useful there too.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then next in row is Anne-Lotte again. So please go ahead.
This might be a bit of a controversial take, especially with my colleagues. The internet was, of course, originally made to be a free space without any borders. But something I've been increasingly worried about is that almost everywhere you have to log in via either Gmail or Facebook. And so eventually now we are creating online identities in which we move around via these big tech companies. So are there any talks about solutions for that?
Yeah, so I agree with you. The identity verification issue is one that has been captured. It's another role that states use to sort of, you know, manage. But there is work on digital identity also on the EU level. But interestingly enough, that has been quite controversial. Some people have framed it as sort of, you know, Big Brother and a scary kind of European project, while they don't bother as much when identity is verified by, you know, Visa, MasterCard, or Facebook.
Okay, thank you. Next in line is Peter van den Bosch. Go ahead, please.
Am I unmuted now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I want to focus on a special fragment of the entire problem, which is social media. Today, there is a wide discussion from which it's completely clear that in the first place, they are damaging for public health. In the second place, that the companies themselves are perfectly aware of the damage they are creating, but they are trying to cover it up. And on the political agenda, the one thing you hear about is trying to implement systems about age control by having minimal ages. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that's not a solution. It should be banned overall because the damage, it's also aimed at grown-ups. So what's your opinion on that?
Well, you're right. We can hear new accounts of what companies knew and didn't act upon on a daily basis. I saw something horrible about toys with AI inside them saying terrible things to kids today. Then there were new revelations about the threshold that Meta allegedly held on to, which was very, very high for accounts that were sharing CSAM, child sexual abuse materials. You're right. And so I think this is a broad question of accountability. And what I try to address in my book is that we need to have a more principle-based approach. And instead, what we often see is a very specific approach. So, for example, the harm of disinformation gets treated differently from the harm of treating children badly or abusing them, or, from consumer harms. And so the slicing up of so many of these aspects also makes it harder to create sort of transparency requirements that would unlock insights in many of the harms, which can then be tackled. Now, the Digital Services Act tries to do this a little bit with regard to content moderation, so it puts obligations on the companies to do more. But I think this has to do with my earlier point about innovating enforcement and innovating the regulatory process. If we see that the ways of operating by these companies are simply outrunning our oversight capabilities and our focus of how to uncover harm, we're obviously not doing the right thing. And so I think some horizontal provisions like more transparency obligations would lead to more insights about harm and could inform different approaches to liability of companies and how to understand that one's rights have been violated in the first place. So this is indeed a very important point. Thank you for bringing it up. I suggest we go to the last question because I have to leave at the
Okay,
hour.
so that's perfectly fine. So the last question is for Paula. Go ahead, please.
Okay,
Marietje?
yeah, can you hear me?
Hoezo?
Okay.
I hear you.
Very quickly, so maybe a little slightly different angle. The moment we start to indeed to decide that there are national security interests at the European level, maybe at the European member level, one of the things we see coming is a screening vet, a screening of people you can work with, the companies you can work with, other countries you can work with. So as academics, sometimes you're told with these people you can work with, those people you cannot work, and sometimes it's simply based on their passport, let's say. How do you square that? Because as an academic, you think you would want to collaborate broadly. I don't have any problem collaborating with a Chinese researcher or maybe with so we see that we as academia, we are now dragged also sometimes in our choices in who can work based on national security. How do you square it, the two?
Well, this is a consequence of, I guess, two things. One is that every country in the EU has their own remit to decide what is a national security risk and what is not. I think this is unsustainable vis-a-vis a single market. And so if we have, one country in Europe that decides some kind of, a new American or Chinese company that's controversial, that has implications for national security is welcome, but the other 20 think it's a risk, then obviously it creates friction with the single market. Similarly, the excluding of academics, and I know this is still rare, so I mean I'm sure that it's challenging when you're confronted with it. I've also seen a lot of this sort of undertone in the US, of course, where concern for espionage from certain countries is very, very vivid. And I've seen the impact it has on individuals, which is often quite significant, because they feel, like a suspect without having, any concerns regarding the state or what have you. But this is politics. We've seen it with nuclear scientists for a long time. We may now see it with computer scientists as well. Yeah, I don't really have a solution. I think this is part of the world we live in, and this world will probably, this zero sum and risk-minded approach to tech expertise will probably become more forcefully present in the next couple of years, because this notion of an open internet that I think Annelot mentioned previously, it's a very beautiful vision, but the stakes are now so high that that world, I think, has long been lost. States are asserting themselves, companies are becoming very, very powerful, and this idea that it's a commons where everybody benefits and where the public interest thrives is a view I'm nostalgic for, but one that does not match the reality that I see. And I think we need to reckon with the reality that we are in. Especially people who care about the survival of democracy really need to operate much more strategically in this moment.
No, non sono impegnato.
Can everyone mute him or herself, please?
Io prenderò.
Okay, so I
Thank
think we have kind of reached the end of this talk. Marietje, I would like to thank you again for your great talk and the great discussion we had afterwards. I think I really enjoyed it. So thank you also everyone in the audience for attending, and I hope to see you all back in December for the next edition of this series of Colloquium. So thank you again for attending, and thank you again, Marietje, for your great contribution.
You're welcome, and good weekend to everybody.
Yes, have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Nou, prettig weekend.
Goed weekend.